Hello, and welcome to the turbulent world with me, James M. Dorsey, as your host. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's fall has seemingly turbocharged Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's neo-Ottoman dreams. In recent days, Mr. Erdogan and his most nationalist supporters fantasized about Syria being Turkish. Turkish pundits imagined a neo-Ottoman Middle East map in which Syria was incorporated into Turkey. Mr. Erdogan fueled the fantasies by saying every incident that has occurred in our region, especially in Syria, reminds us of this fact: Turkey is bigger than Turkey. Mr. Erdogan said Turkey cannot limit its horizons to its current surface area and cannot escape or hide from its destiny, lamenting that the Middle East borders were defined after World War I and the demise of the Ottoman Empire. Mr. Erdogan asserted that Aleppo, Damascus, Idlib, and Raqqa could have been part of our homeland. The Turkish fantasies fit Middle East scholar Lina Khatib's comparison of Mr. al-Assad's toppling to the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall, describing it as the Middle East 1989. Like the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of 54 years of Assad family rule signals an earthquake in the regional order, with tremors that will be felt for decades to come. Just as 1989 was marked by a series of falling dominoes in Poland, Hungary, East Germany, and elsewhere, the collapse of the Syrian regime is part of a chain of events, including Israel's decimation of Hezbollah, Iran's loss of its most potent proxy forces, and the weakening of Russia due to the war it started in Ukraine, Mrs. Khatib said. The Turkish fantasies are all but a pipe dream, unless the Syrian transition from Mr. Assad to Ahmed al-Shara, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Islamist rebel group that led the overthrow of the Syrian president, falters and Syria fragments. Fragmentation is possible, even if for now it is unlikely. Nevertheless, Turkish and Israeli occupations of Syrian lands enhances the risk. Afraid that post-Assad Syria, as Libya after the 2011 overthrow of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, could descend into chaos, Hayat Tahrir this weekend moved quickly to crack down on violence in the coastal region of Latakia, home to the Alawite Shiite sect to which the al-Assads belong. The crackdown followed attacks by unidentified gunmen on checkpoints, courts, and police facilities. The attacks, like similar incidents in Damascus and elsewhere, appeared designed to destroy evidence that prosecutors could use in the prosecution of former regime officials. On Saturday, demonstrators in Latakia protested against Hayat Tahrir's alleged meddling in their affairs. On the plus side, Hayat Tahrir likely took heart from 10,000 soldiers in Mr. al-Assad's military availing themselves of the new ruler's amnesty for conscripts who were not involved in atrocities, and handing over their weapons at a reconciliation center in Latakia. Even so, Hayat Tahrir and Turkey fear Iran could exploit Latakia's resistance. I think Iran will learn lessons in the new period. We need to help Iran constructively, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan told Al Hadith, a Saudi newspaper. Mr. Fidan's remarks sparked angry Iranian responses. An article entitled, "This Neighbor is No Longer Trustworthy," in Iran's Kayhan newspaper, which is close to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, described Mr. Erdogan as opportunistic and a self-appointed caliph. Kayhan asserted that Mr. Erdogan was seeking to revive the Ottoman Caliphate. Mr. Erdogan is gambling dangerously. Turkey is playing with fire, even if its leaders think they can control the game. Turkey should know that these are still early days. Betting on the spark it lit, which has now spread to Syria, will have long-term consequences and may soon lay the groundwork for the fall of its own regime, like it did to Bashar al-Assad's regime, Kayhan thundered. Meanwhile, in northern Syria, the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, or SNA, battled the US-supported predominantly Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, the ground troops in the fight against the Islamic State, and the guardians of detention facilities in which thousands of jihadist fighters and their families have been detained. Turkey has concentrated commandos, allied militia fighters, and artillery along the border with Syria, dismantled the border wall near the Syrian Kurdish town of Kobani, and increased drone attacks on Manbij in preparation for a possible large-scale incursion. Turkish Foreign Minister Fidan suggested the new Syrian government could fend off an incursion if it addressed the Kurdish issue properly. If the new Syrian administration addresses this issue properly, there will be no reason for us to intervene. We see right steps now taken in the right direction. We need to give them some more time, Mr. Fidan said, adding that the Hayat Tahrir government should take complete control of Kurdish-held territory in northern Syria. Turkey classifies the Syrian Democratic Force as a terrorist organization because of its links to the outlawed Kurdish Workers' Party, PKK, which has waged a low-level, 4-decades-old insurgency in southeastern Turkey in its quest for recognition of Kurdish rights. Hayat Tahrir, despite taking a backseat and letting the Syrian National Army fight it out in Kurdish-dominated parts of northern Syria, will ultimately want control, given that it hosts the country's oil and gas reserves, most fertile lands, and water resources. Turkey's attempt to exploit fluidity in northern Syria to its advantage comes as the United States fears that the Islamic State remnants in Syria will attempt to reconstitute the group, like jihadists in Iraq did when they freed fighters from Iraqi detention facilities after the 2011 U.S. withdrawal from the country. U.S. Central Command Commander General Michael Kurilla asserted that the Islamic State planned to free 8,000 of its fighters held in SDF-managed detention facilities. U.S. forces in Syria have repeatedly attacked Islamic State targets in northern Syria since Mr. al-Assad's fall. The Pentagon said it had more than doubled the number of U.S. military personnel in Syria to 2,000 to meet shifting mission requirements. Last week, Al-Naba, an Islamic State weekly, decried the plight of the group's inmates in the SDF camps, saying it prayed for God to empower its fighters to free them. The Islamic State staged a brazen breakout of prisoners in 2018, employing explosives-laden vehicles and killing 180 people. As part of an effort to ease frictions among competing Syrian rebel factions, Turkey has promoted the Syrian National Army as a major player in Syria's future. Mr. Erdogan hopes that Mr. al-Sharra's recent meeting with commanders of the Syrian National Army, an amalgam of some 40 Turkish-backed militias, will lead to the group's representation in a new Syrian government. Mr. Erdogan believes the SNA deserves cabinet posts as a reward for the militia's role in the rebel offensive that toppled Mr. al-Assad, and on the back of its control of the northern and central parts of Aleppo and Raqqa provinces. We are making constructive advice for all the opposition groups to come together and have a unified government, Mr. Fidan, a former Turkish intelligence chief, said. So far, Hayat Tahrir has appointed 14 ministers to the caretaker government, which is slated to remain in office until March. All of them served in the group's administration in Idlib, the rebels' erstwhile stronghold in northern Syria. Immediately after being appointed defense minister, Murhaf Abu Kasra, also known as Abu Hassan 600, a prominent figure in the insurgency that toppled Mr. al-Assad, attended a meeting of armed groups on Saturday that, according to the state-run Syrian Arab news agency, discussed the form of the military institution in the new Syria. The groups reportedly agreed to hand over their weapons and fold into a new Syrian military and security force, despite Hayat Tahrir earlier encountering resistance in Deraa in southern Syria when it attempted to collect the arms of local militias. It was not immediately clear whether the militia commanders agreed to a timeline for the handover. The Syrian Democratic Forces was not invited to participate in the gathering. Even so, Mr. al-Shara told a joint news conference with Mr. Fidan that the Kurdish force, like all other militia, was not exempted from the obligation to hand over their weapons. Returning to Ankara from a summit in Cairo of 8 global South countries, Mr. Erdogan offered to help Hayat Tahrir craft a new centralized political system and constitution for Syria that would ensure Syrian Kurds are prevented from carving out an autonomous region of their own. Mr. Fidan was in Damascus this weekend to discuss Turkish assistance. Turkish Defense Minister Yaşar Güler earlier offered to train a new Syrian military. Nordic Monitor, a Swedish-based network of exiled Turkish journalists and intellectuals, said Mr. Erdogan hoped to shape a new Syria that embraces Islam, sees Turkey as its prime ally, and embraces neo-Ottomanism. To do so, Mr. Erdogan wants to place advisors in key Syrian ministries to build capacity, share expertise, and position Istanbul-based Syrian opposition figures as members of a transition government that will be formed when the caretaker government's term expires in March. Speaking to Yeni Shafak, a Turkish newspaper, Mr. al-Shara said, Turkey will take precedence over other countries in rebuilding Syria. We believe that Turkey will share with Syria the experience it acquired through its own economic development. After all, this isn't a victory for the Syrian people alone, but also for the Turkish people, because this is a victory of the oppressed over their oppressors. A recent study of successful rebellions since 1900 by 3 U.S. universities underlines the significance of the Turkish efforts, provided that they are inclusive. The study's conclusion that authoritarian regimes established by rival rebel groups quickly fracture and spark new uprisings raises questions about Turkey's insistence on excluding the Syrian Democratic Forces from the political process. Ankara has had pragmatic engagement with Hayat Tahrir for years, forging ties that could now help it steer the new authorities in Damascus in a direction to its liking, the International Crisis Group said in an analysis of the regional repercussions of Mr. al-Assad's downfall. This week, Hayat Tahrir intends to initiate a national dialogue involving representatives of all Syrian communities, political and civil society groups, and rebel militias to chart the country's transition. The dialogue will likely force Hayat Tahrir to clarify its vision for Syria's future, the degree to which the group is willing to share power, and whether its governance model is more transparent and inclusive than the way it ruled in Idlib before the offensive that toppled Mr. al-Assad. In doing so, the dialogue will probably offer a first indication of how fraught Syria's political transition will be, particularly with Hayat Tahrir wanting to govern Syria for a period of 5 years before holding elections. For its part, Israel projects its recent occupation of Syrian territory beyond the long occupied Golan Heights, conquered in the 1967 Middle East War, as a hedge as much against a possible splintering of Syria as in anticipation of a Turkish-backed Islamist regime in Damascus. Hayat Tahrir in the driver's seat in Damascus under Turkish patronage raises a daunting possibility for Israel of hostile Islamists on its northeastern border. That predicament could become even darker if the Kurds are pushed back, making room for a resurgence by the Islamic State, said Shalom Lipner, a former advisor to several Israeli prime ministers. In a throwback to the 1970s, when the United States and Israel backed Iraqi Kurdish insurgents, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar said Israel should consider helping Syrian Kurds. Mr. Saar described the Kurds as Israel's natural allies. We have long relations with the Kurds. It's part of our history. It's part of their history. But Israel's not going to take on the American role in supporting the Kurds, said retired Major General Yaakov Amidror, a former national security advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you for being part of the turbulent world. You are the raison d'etre of the turbulent world, irrespective of whether you are a free reader or a paid subscriber. However, allow me to extend a special thank you to paid subscribers who make the turbulent world possible. Your support and loyalty are invaluable. You can contribute to an embattled world of independent reporting and analysis at a time when it could not be more crucial. To those debating whether to become a paid subscriber, consider the importance of maintaining media that empowers readers, listeners, and viewers to form opinions based on independent, rigorous reporting and analysis. Whether you are a free or paid subscriber, I wish you happy holidays and everything you want for yourselves in the new year.